Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the real and honestly kind of messy story behind Thomas Edison's electric vehicle battery failure. And more importantly, we'll see exactly how this whole saga illustrates his broader philosophy of innovation. You know, we often think of guys like Edison as these magical geniuses who just pulled brilliant ideas out of thin air. But actually, his work on the battery reveals a process that was incredibly grueling, totally chaotic, and absolutely fascinating. So, let's kick this off with a surprising question. Are electric cars a modern invention? You might be thinking, well, yeah, for sure. But did you know that back in the late 19th century, electric cars actually outsold gas-powered vehicles? No way, right? But it's true. They were considered way more reliable. When automobiles first hit the scene, the internal combustion engine was famously finicky. It was unpredictable, it was loud, and motorists strongly preferred electric cars simply because they caused far fewer daily headaches. But of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing, which brings us to the electric car problem. To really grasp Edison's challenge here, we have to look at the massive roadblock facing those early vehicles. The existing lead-acid batteries severely limited how long these cars could last, and the scientific community was desperately searching for a lighter, more powerful, longer-lasting alternative. I mean, picture this. These early batteries were incredibly heavy, completely ruining the car's efficiency. Worse, the acid inside them actively ate away at the interior. They were literally dissolving the vehicles from the inside out. So Edison, who absolutely loved automobiles, decided, you know what, I'm going to be the one to solve this. Now, this perfectly highlights the stark contrast in innovation styles back then. You had Nikola Tesla, who relied on these massive, visionary, conceptual leaps. And then you had Thomas Edison, who relied entirely on commercial rigor and methodical physical experimentation. Tesla might visualize an entire AC motor design during a casual walk in the park, but Edison, he wanted a practical commercial framework built on relentless trial and error. Edison actually famously declared that he didn't want to invent anything that wouldn't sell. And that methodical commercial approach led straight into our next chapter, 10,000 failed attempts. This was Edison's grueling development phase. He set impossibly high standards for a new alkaline battery, demanding a staggering amount of persistence from his team. His new battery had to be lighter, far more reliable, and up to 3 times more powerful than the old lead-acid ones. So the sheer volume of work here is what's truly mind-blowing. Edison and his staff conducted thousands, often cited as up to 10,000, separate tests on various metals and chemical substances. 10,000? They methodically tested every conceivable material, working day and night, just praying they'd crack the code for a dependable, rechargeable car battery. There is actually an amazing historical sketch from 1878 by Edison's 16-year-old nephew, Charles, that perfectly captures the vibe in the lab. It shows a literal bug causing technical difficulties. This is how they actually coined the term bug to describe constant technical faults. They didn't view these endless failures as defeats. They saw them as inevitable puzzles they just had to solve. Things were constantly breaking, leaking, and feeling around them. But they didn't let these bugs derail the whole operation. They just cataloged them and kept pushing forward. Fast forward a bit, and we run into the 1903 battery flaws. So it's 1903. After 4 years of round-the-clock work, Edison finally thought he had the finished product. But instead of revolutionizing the market like he promised, engineers quickly uncovered some really crippling flaws. The potassium hydroxide inside leaked. The nickel graphite conductors failed. The batteries absolutely refused to hold a charge. And ultimately, they were no better than the heavy lead-acid batteries they were supposed to replace. Despite all the massive hype and this initial flood of pre-orders from car manufacturers, reality hit hard. The physical product has completely failed to live up to Edison's promises. Which brings us to an entirely different kind of problem, the Model T disruption. Edison was forced to completely shut down his factory for a massive, wildly expensive redesign. From 1904 to 1909, production was dead in the water. But he refused to throw in the towel. He spent those years completely retooling his entire process, utilizing much more costly materials. Finally, he emerged in 1910, ready to begin mass production on a vastly improved, highly reliable alkaline battery. But right as he fixed the science, he got completely blindsided by something way outside of his laboratory. And that macroeconomic complication was none other than Henry Ford. In 1909, Ford introduced the inexpensive, gas-powered Model T, and it essentially made the internal combustion engine the undisputed automotive norm. Talk about terrible timing, right? Ford's assembly line made gas cars so incredibly cheap that the electric passenger vehicle market basically vanished almost overnight. So Edison had just spent years building the perfect battery for an industry that was rapidly disappearing right before his eyes. But here is where the story takes a fascinating turn. Success hidden in failure. Even though the battery project completely failed at its primary automotive goal, this massive setback actually transformed into an incredible technological success. This is where Edison's commercial genius really shines through. Because his redesigned battery was so ridiculously reliable, it found highly profitable alternative uses. It ended up powering small urban delivery vehicles, mining lamps, train lighting, and even submarines. While he totally missed the passenger car boom, industrial markets that demanded absolute life-or-death dependability eagerly snatched up Edison's new alkaline batteries. And even more importantly for us today, this grueling, supposedly failed experiment directly paved the way for the modern alkaline battery. It eventually became Edison's most profitable product ever. By pivoting away from his original, very narrow vision and adapting to what the market actually needed, he managed to turn a massive, embarrassing setback into the greatest financial triumph of his entire career. Years later, when an assistant expressed regret that thousands of their initial experiments had yielded absolutely no results, Edison fired back with a legendary response that basically sums up his entire method. He said, "Results? Why, man, I have gotten a lot of results. I know several thousand things that won't work." See, he didn't view a failed test as a waste of time at all. He viewed it as absolutely vital data collection. Eliminating the wrong paths was just as crucial as finding the right one. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I'd love for you to think about your own setbacks. What failures are paving the way for your next big success? If we can learn to reframe our own bugs and flawed experiments the way Edison did, we might just realize we haven't failed at all. We've just gathered the exact data we need to finally build something that works. Keep experimenting, and we'll see you next time.